Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are going to conquer variables. So to begin with, just like last lesson, we'll talk about our objectives. And the main objectives today is that we want to say what a variable is, how to assign a variable, how we name variables so they make sense to us, how we reassign variables, so in other words, we update them, what a constant is, and then how to tie that in with printing, which is what we looked at last lesson. So while the computer is running, it loads all the software that it's using from the hard drive into the RAM, into memory. And what happens is many of the programs that we use need to store data and then make changes to that data. So a good example of that are games. For example, you might be playing a game that has a score. And while you're playing, your score might update, or you may have some coins or rings, and you may update the value of what your score was, or how many coins you have, or points, or whatever, right? So we call those variables variable because they vary. So when we assign variables in like named locations, we give them names that make sense. So here you can see that a variable might be called age, or it might be called Joseph, and these refer to what data is being stored in the named location. So for example, if I give my variable name the name age, it stores the value 15 under that named location inside the RAM. Let's do an example. So we're looking back at the code editor that we used last lesson, and we're going to assign a variable. So let's assign the variable name, and name will store the value Eric, for example. Let's use a capital. So if I run the program now, nothing's going to happen. Well, something is going to happen. It's going to take that value and it's going to store that value in a named location called name. And when I run it, I don't see an output. And that's fine. That's simple. The reason why we don't see an output is because we never asked Python to output anything to us. So now when we run, this time we can see that there's an output called Eric, because we asked Python to take that named location, to go and find that named location called name in the RAM, and we asked it to display it on the screen. So an important point is that a variable name cannot be the same as one of the command words or a keyword that the programming language uses. So last lesson we looked at the keyword print, or the command print, and that being a keyword is a word that we can't use as a variable name. And there's others that we'll come across. So we'll come across, for example, while, for, if, and a whole bunch more as we go along. There are naming conventions in any programming language. First and foremost, if I come back to this example, you notice that I gave the value that was going to store a name, I gave it a variable name such as name, okay? And that's good, because if I had just said, for example, hey, let's call this X, for example. The problem then is, if I come back to this code, let's say 3 months later, or if I'm working with a team on a large program, and my variables are really basic, they don't have any meaning, it will be very hard for my team members to understand what that variable is meant to store. So it makes sense that we use naming conventions. So first of all, we use sensible names that might refer to something. And going back to the slides, my face is slightly covering. Let's move it slightly to this side, next to, hey, that looks good. Right, so going back to this, we can see that there are two naming conventions for the way that we deal with variables that have more than one word in the name. Okay, so we can either use snake casing or we can use camel casing, and we'll speak about that more in a second as we do an example. And the other thing we should remember is that we always start a variable with a lowercase. Right, so for example, in the case of me storing someone's name, rather than just saying name, I could say first name. And in this example, I've used snake casing, right? And what this basically does is separates the two words using an underscore. The other way to do this would be camel casing, which separates the two words using a capital for every word. My personal preference is snake casing. There's no right or wrong. If you're working as part of a team, then you agree with the team what the naming conventions are. Okay, so what we now want to look at is what's called a constant. So a constant is another name for a variable, except while the program is running, this value is not meant to change. For example, 1 is VAT, right? Another example while programming might be that maybe I'm storing the value of I'm storing the value of something that doesn't change. For example, pi. So I shouldn't name this with lowercase letters. I should name this with uppercase letters, signifying that this is a constant and we shouldn't try to reassign this value. So having done that, I think we've covered everything for this lesson. And I want to keep it short. There is more to do, but I want to cover that in the next lesson so that we're not cramming too much into one. So please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next lesson.